Okay, hopefully you can see the screen.
Yes, sir,
Right.
it is visible.
Right. So I am not intentionally making it full screen because in recent times I have had very lot of problem on my laptop with Google Meet and full screen mode PowerPoint. So hopefully you can just see the slides in this minimized, this normal reading mode also. So my talk will have two parts. Initially, I'll speak for about maybe 40 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes on introducing the concept of PAF, and then Pranesh will take over and describe several attacks of machine learning applications of machine learning to launch something called modeling attacks on this physically unclonable function or PAFs. What is a modeling attack? What is a PAF? All these things will be clear once we proceed. Uh, Pranesh's talk will be probably closer to the original topic of this workshop. So his talk will span probably occupy more than 45 minutes, probably close to an hour or so. So I have been told that although the scheduled talk duration is from 4 to 5, I can take more time. So my guess is that we will continue till at least 5:45 or so. So without further delay, let me start. Uh, oh, by the way, Pranesh is a fourth year PhD student working under my supervision at the Computer Science and Engineering Department of IIT Kharagpur. Uh, so this is going to be the outline of my portion of the talk. So I'll first describe what is a PAF, what is the motivation for PAF circuit design. These PAFs are basically circuits, okay, silicon circuits. Just like you have integrated circuits, these are also circuits which can be part of any integrated circuit. I'll describe the concept, the fundamental properties, some quality metrics, some numerical metrics which you can calculate by characterizing a given PAF to kind of evaluate whether it is a good PAF or a bad PAF. And in some applications of PAFs in security, PAFs have been started to get applied in different security applications. I would not have the time or the scope to cover everything. I will just concentrate on only one application, which is the fundamental application for which the PAF circuits came first were proposed back in 2002. So it's been almost 20 years back that the first PAF circuits were proposed. Then I will cover two very commonly studied PAF variants. One is called an arbiter PAF or APAF, and another is called a ring oscillator PAF or ROPAF. And then I will describe some challenges why the design of this type of silicon circuits is very difficult. And then I will hand over to Pranesh, who will continue from that point with this background. So there are two primary motivations for PAF circuit design. One is anti-counterfeiting of integrated circuits. You might be surprised to know that the integrated circuits or the ICs, which are the main primary components of most of our electronic devices that we use in our daily life, smartphones, laptop, computers, you name it, whatever. Cars, and a car on average has over 100 integrated circuits into it. Okay, an average car. If it's a high-end car, the number is probably close to 200 or so. So the amount of electronic components that are there in a car is humongous. In our all our systems is really large, and this is growing. It might be surprised to know that 30 to 40% of the ICs in circulation across all systems combined are actually counterfeit. Okay, counterfeit means that these are not what we call, these are used ICs mostly. So these are so-called second-hand ICs. Okay, the second-hand ICs are called recycled ICs in this domain, that they were part of some PCB earlier, but now they have been kind of scavenged from these PCBs and they are being used in as part of a different new system. But when you are buying your smartphone or a laptop, we rarely, if ever, we kind of query whether the electronic components or these ICs are actually authentic or not. It is very difficult actually to find it out. About 1% of new ICs being sold every year is counterfeit, and total is 30 to 40% of total ICs in circulation at any given point of time is counterfeit. The estimated business in 2008 was estimated to be $1 billion per day. That's like 77,000 crore rupees per day. Of course, it is larger now. This is 2021. Okay. So it is this problem of detecting counterfeit ICs is very, very relevant for any country, particularly for India, given that we do not have any integrated circuit IC manufacturing. Whatever IC is manufactured, we buy from other countries, that is import, and then some of them are kind of assembled here inside factories in India, but we do not have any factory to actually manufacture these ICs. What is the harm if we have this type of counterfeit ICs in your systems? Well, the first thing is why would you willingly want to pay for an used stuff by paying the full money, right? You do not want to pay the full cost. Say the entire laptop it is a used laptop, you pay half the price and buy it. That is one thing. But you are buying a new laptop from the market, okay? You expect every component inside it to be new, right? This is very natural because you are paying the full price. However, some of the chips inside these are actually recycled chips, which might fail soon. Within 1 year, it might fail because these are old chips. So there is an issue with reliability. They might leak information because you don't know from which company it has come. Is this processor actually from Intel? It looks like Intel, it is stamped Intel. It has a serial number, but serial numbers can be faked. Many people have shown that this can be faked. And they have kind of infiltrated very, very secure, even military locations. There are stories of counterfeit electronics, entire routers being counterfeit in very secure locations like the Pentagon in US, the US Defense Headquarters. So just imagine that if they can infiltrate something like a Pentagon, we as individual customers, we have no chance of defense against them, or it's very difficult to protect ourselves. They might leak information. They might have something called hardware trojans, which are circuits which might cause disastrous failure. At the individual level, they might cause harm by causing your system to fail or by leaking personal information. But at a larger level, they can cause great harm by bringing down entire power infrastructure, smart grids, aeroplane flight controls. An aeroplane in flight might misbehave, and then it can have an accident, and everybody on board will be killed, etc. Okay, so one of the goals was that can we have a lightweight hardware security primitive that is a lightweight circuit? Okay, lightweight by lightweight in this domain, in VLSI circuit design domain, it means a circuit which does not take too much area, which does not consume too much power, etc. Okay, that can act as a fingerprint generator to uniquely identify each IC instance. So now, just like we have our voter ID cards or Aadhaar, which is linked with our biometrics, can we have some sort of fingerprint? We shouldn't call it biometric, but some sort of a silicon signature or electrical signature generated from the silicon that will uniquely identify those IC instances. Okay, and they have also been started to be used because Internet of Things is a very, very hot topic now. They have been started to be used to develop lightweight security protocols for Internet of Things, because IoT nodes are energy and area constrained. So if you want to try traditional cryptographic protocols over them, it is quite difficult. So can we have a lightweight hardware security primitive to allow secure but inexpensive security protocols? This is the second motivation. So this PUF, in very simple terms, is kind of a fingerprint generator for an IC. What exactly causes this is a slightly difficult topic to explain. They essentially take advantage of something called process variation, where the internal properties of the transistors that make up the circuits randomly vary. Okay, and you do not have too much control over them. Okay, so usually this is very bad, but PUF circuits actually try to take advantage of this non-ideality. Okay, but in an abstract sense, from a computer science viewpoint, you can look at them to be some black box, which has a m-bit input called a challenge, and it generates a n-bit response called n-bit output called a response. Okay, so basically these are m input, n output Boolean functions. Just like any Boolean function has a truth table, this also has a truth table with m input, m columns, and n rows, n input columns and n output columns. Okay, so this is a m to n Boolean function. Now the question is that what makes this unique? The uniqueness is that, see, you can, if you manufacture, say, the circuit for an AND function, say, you know that its truth table is known. Its truth table is exactly the same as an AND function truth table, or an OR function truth table, or an NAND function truth table, whatever. For a PUF, every instance of the silicon IC that you design with exactly the same design, structurally they are exactly the same, but their truth table will be different to each other. This is the fundamental property of a PUF that makes it different from other types of digital circuits. Okay, so this is very peculiar. This is something which we are not very familiar with, this concept that a circuit with multiple copies of it, okay, in silicon, if each of them behave separately. This is, and none of them is they are behaving separately not because they are faulty, they are just like that. But in biological situations, this is quite common. For example, every human being, with everybody has two pairs, one pair of hand, one pair of legs, one pair of eyes, one pair of ears, one nose, etc. Structurally very similar. But our fingerprints since birth are different. In fact, the fingerprints of even genetically identical twins, sometimes twins are genetically identical. Okay, so they are almost clones of each other, twins. Even their fingerprints are different to each other. That is why fingerprint is such a good biometric identifier, because it is more or less guaranteed that you will have different fingerprints for every human being on this planet. Also, it is physically unclonable, fingerprints, because given the fingerprint of one human being, currently we do not have any technology to clone another human being with exactly the same fingerprint. We can genetically clone that human being. The genetic cloning technology exists. You might have heard in the 90s there was this ship called Dolly that was cloned for the first time in UK, and that created a lot of media highlight that time. Now human beings, the technology exists to clone. Whether it is ethical or not, whether it is correct to clone human beings, these are different issues, and a lot of debate is there. But the technology currently exists to clone them. Even if you clone a human being, the fingerprint of these two human beings will be different from each other. These two, like the cloned version. So this is a very important property. Okay, we want similar behavior from a PUF circuit. Okay, so we will make them in silicon, and these are the ideal properties of PUFs. So given and first, it should be easily evaluatable. What it means is that given a PUF and any input X, it is easy to apply that input X challenge and to get the response. It should be unique. That is, its truth table should be unique, and this truth table is its identity basically. Just like your Aadhaar card with a unique number and linked with your fingerprint in the government database is a unique identifier. Similarly, its truth table is a unique identifier of a PUF instance. It should be reproducible. That is, given the same input, you should expect to get the same output, maybe with some small error. Okay. Now, this reproducibility is an important property, but it is ideal property. It is not actually met in practice. What is meant by reproducibility is your fingerprint today and your fingerprint tomorrow and 10 years from today, 20 years from today, etc., would be more or less the same. means through your entire lifetime, your fingerprint should be the same. This is a very difficult property to, in human beings it holds unless you cut your finger or something bad happens, more or less your fingerprint remains the same. But for puff circuits, unfortunately, this truth table, that is its response to the inputs overall, not every response, but overall truth table, there are slight variations with time, with temperature change, with voltage fluctuations, etc. Okay, and there are ways to solve this problem at a circuit level. I will not go into this because this is not a talk on circuit design. Anyways, now they should be unclonable, that is, given a puff, it will be difficult to construct another procedure puff clone. So intentionally we are saying procedure. We are not mentioning whether it's a silicon puff dash is whether is actually silicon or something else. But some clone puff dash will be difficult to make such that puff dash and puff are very, very similar. So it will be very difficult to clone. They should be unpredictable. So this is a very important property. This says that given a small data set, a training set of inputs and corresponding outputs, okay, it will be very difficult for you to build a model based on the training set which will be able to predict the rest of the data set with great accuracy, that is small error. So it is basically saying that it will be difficult to clone or build a model for a actually a real puff. Okay. Unfortunately, this is something which doesn't actually hold. Unfortunately, means as we will see, machine learning is very, very effective in, especially deep learning in recent years has proved to be extremely efficient in actually building the model from very small training data sets. Okay, so this is the fundamental problem of challenging this unpredictability property. This is the topic of today's talk primarily. Okay, how can we use machine learning to say that given a small fraction, very, very small fraction of the truth table, I would be able to, I'll be able to model the puff or not model the puff. Then it should be one way that given the input, given the output, it will be difficult to predict the corresponding input, and it should be tamper evident. That is, if you do something with the circuit, permanently its responses will change. If you change the silicon puff, its responses or mapping will change. So there are two main properties. One is called uniqueness and another is called reliability. In uniqueness property says that if you apply the same input to different instances of the puff, like puff 1, puff 2, puff 3, etc., their outputs will be different from each other. This output is not a single output. This output is a collection of outputs, and this C is a collection of challenges. So the mappings won't be exactly the same. Some of the mappings might be the same. Okay, so the truth tables, there would be some matching entries. But the truth tables wholesale will not be exactly the same for the different instances. So this is called a uniqueness property of a good puff. A reliability property, on the other hand, says that you keep the puff instance the same, but you apply the same set of challenges over time. And in that case, the responses should be the same today or tomorrow or day after tomorrow or 2 years from now. The input output behavior should be the same. So this is also an ideal property, and this is difficult to meet, as I mentioned earlier. Then there is something called a uniformity, which is the ratios and zeros and ones in the truth table. Ideally, you want the ratio to be somewhere close to 0.5, which is like an XOR function has exactly 0.5 uniformity. Because if you look at the truth table of an XOR function or an XNOR function, they are balanced. They have equal number of zeros and equal number of ones at the output. On the other hand, the truth tables of AND, OR functions, NAND, NOR, these functions are extremely unbalanced. Okay, they have either only 1 1 or only 1 0, etc., which is quite bad. Now, why are puffs important? Why are they attractive? Well, security with the security, if you want to implement security with PUFs, PUFs let you achieve this security without the need to explicitly store the key in the PUF itself. The key, the secret or the key has to be, or the identifier has to be can be stored somewhere else. You don't need to store it in situ. That is, say the PUF is part of some IoT or edge computing device which is deployed in the field. You do not need to store the secret along with the PUF there. The secret can be stored in a remote server, maybe on the cloud, and then still authentication might be possible. So I will now next describe how this is done. If you store the security in situ, okay, there is a static key which is stored in, say, a non-volatile memory somewhere in your system. There are many issues. Okay, this key can be stolen, first of all. I mean, this secret can be stolen in many different ways. So that is better you try to avoid this problem. Okay. So in a PUF, this never happens. Now, the only application of PUF that I am going to mention is the use of PUFs in low-cost hardware authentication. This is the first application, the canonical application of PUFs. Okay, this is how the entire business of PUF circuits came into existence, and the research on PUF circuits started. The research on PUF circuits started with a master's thesis published in 2002 from MIT. The master's thesis was guided by an Indian professor called Professor Srinivas Devdas, very, very famous person. You can have, he has many, this MIT open courseware courses also on algorithms, etc. on YouTube. But Professor Devdas, he is MS student, published a thesis which basically described the concept, described several implementations, etc., etc. Now let us try to understand how can PUF help to protect against counterfeit ICs. Okay. Suppose there is suppose a company makes a device A which is authentic, and in this, by device it means an integrated circuit. Okay, for this slide, the authentic device means it is an integrated circuit for simplicity. So this circuit is made. Inside the integrated circuit, the PUF circuit is also there. The PUF circuit is usually small, so it fits nicely with the other parts of your circuitry on one single chip. Then the PUF is, after manufacturing, the PUF is characterized. Please understand that before manufacturing, nobody knows what is the truth table of a PUF. Not even the designer knows what is the truth table of a PUF. For example, before a human child is born, the parents also do not know. If they somebody asks the parents, do you know what will be the fingerprint of your child who will be born in a few months? They'd say, no, we don't know. Nobody knows. It's completely a work of nature, right? So it exactly like that. PUF, nobody knows what is going to be the final truth table. Okay. So once the PUF is born, that is, it is manufactured in silicon, you can characterize the circuit. You can apply several challenges, note down the corresponding responses, and that truth table is the signature of the PUF that you store in a secret database. Okay. So the thing is, the entire PUF truth table cannot be evaluated. For example, the total number of inputs to the PUF can be large. It can be 64, 128, etc. As you can guess, for a 64 input PUF circuit, even if it has only one output, the size of the truth table has 2 power 64 rows. If it's a 128-bit input circuit, it has 2 power 128 rows. So it's humongously large. Nobody can characterize such a large circuit. But say you select randomly, say 1000 entries from your 2 power 64 size truth table and characterize it and store that database. Then it is sent in the market and it is sold. Later on, some point of time, that IC lands up with some customer who wants to know whether this IC is authentic or not. Now, simply looking at its serial number and asking the company, is this authentic, is not sufficient, because the serial number might have been cloned in an untrusted supply chain. Okay. So he asks the company, is this a circuit that you manufactured or somebody else has manufactured it and is claiming that you have manufactured it? So it provides the company with the serial number. The company finds out the database of the PUF for that IC based on its serial number, and then it asks the user, okay, I'll give you some inputs. You note down what values you are getting and let me know. So he first gives one input challenge, gets the response back from the user, and he compares. If those are matching, he says, yeah, it has matched. Yes, this has matched. Yes, this has matched. In this way, it does for 100 different challenges and notes down 100 different responses. Current state of the art is if 95% or more, some people say 97% or more matches are there, then you declare that the PUF is authentic. Okay, so it is the IC. Okay, so why is this called a challenge and response? If you have watched this Bollywood or Hollywood movies with these villains, okay, I mean, there are these gangster movies, you will find that there are, so you want to enter a secret meeting of the gangsters, okay, somebody wants to enter. So at several stages, when you want to enter that meeting, there are guards standing at the doors and they will ask you certain questions and you have to give certain answers. Some magic words you have to say, and these magic words might be separate. You might be asked 3 different questions and you have to say 3 different magic words as the answer in proper sequence at 3 different doors. Only then you can reach the final room where the meeting is happening. Okay, so those are challenges, and based on your responses, you would be taken in. Now, in those situations, you fail to give any one response, you are blocked. You can go in no further. Any further, you cannot go. In PUF, it is not that strict because PUF responses vary with temperature and environmental fluctuations, voltage fluctuations, etc. They say, okay, fine. You answer, give correct responses to 95 or more percentage of questions asked, you have passed the test. It is something like this. So pass marks is like 95% or so. So if the PUF is authentic, yes, probably they will be able to answer 100% of the questions correctly. And then it will be verified that it is the correct PUF IC. On the other hand, a fake IC with some other PUF but the same serial number will not match the challenge response database because its responses that it will be generated from the PUF, even for the same challenge, will be different because that's the property of the PUF. They will be substantially different. Some responses might match, but all responses will not match. So it will fail this 95% test and it will be rejected to be a fake IC. So in this way, PUFs can perform low-cost hardware authentication. Now I will very quickly describe 2 different PUF variants. Okay, so before that, let me just describe in very brief that what are the challenges in PUF design. Traditional CAD tool-based IC design is very well established. However, it is very difficult to apply those things directly for PUF design because the first thing is when you are designing a circuit, you want to make sure whatever you have designed is correct. In a PUF, the question of what is a correct PUF is a very difficult question to answer. Typically in IC design, you try to match the input-output characteristics, whether it is matching what you expect through simulations. Here, what will you simulate? First of all, this process variation effect is very difficult to simulate accurately. Secondly, you do not know what is your golden behavior. You can only evaluate something whether it is correct when you know what is correct. Here, there is no this question of what is a correct PUF. This is not a meaningful question because every PUF in a sense is correct. Its truth table is unique. Do you ever ask the question, what is the standard fingerprint of a human being? This question doesn't have any answer. There is no standard fingerprint of a human being. Every human being has a different fingerprint, and that's the way it is, right? So this same problem exists with PUF. Whether they have made any mistake in designing the circuit is very difficult to do. There are some devices called FPGAs, which allow you to perform easy prototype digital design. However, that is also very difficult to apply for PUFs because there are many parameters have to be handcrafted, which is not possible on FPGAs. Okay, and they are built with SRAM. I have not described SRAM PUF, but FPGAs basically are very, very difficult customers for PUF design. Now, the first PUF example. So, what we do in our work, whatever Pranesh is going to describe, mostly are based on MATLAB simulations of PUFs with random delay values. I'm going to describe what are those based on inbuilt MATLAB random number generators. You can write your own Python code also or anything. C, Python, whatever you want to build this kind of models. MATLAB. First example is called an arbiter PUF or APUF. This is a widely used PUF. This is a cascade of path swapping switches. Okay, several of them. Here we have n+1 such stages starting from something shown with C0 up to Cn. Now, these path swapping stages, each of them are two-port networks which have two inputs and two outputs. Now, either depending on a control signal that you apply at the bottom, which is shown with the C symbols, the signals applied at the input two ports at the input either go straight or they cross over and reach the two other ports. Very simple operation. Okay. And I suggest that you try to implement this circuit using 2:1 multiplexers. All of you know 2:1 multiplexers. At some stage, you must have studied this. Please try to implement this using 2:1 multiplexers. It is possible to implement. It's very easy to implement actually, this every block. Now, there are many such blocks. All are cascaded. The input of the first block on the left is shorted, and you apply a step waveform in it. When you do that, these signals start propagating along two different paths, one along the top input entry and the one along the bottom input entry. Depending on the different combinations of zeros and ones applied at the different stages, these signals either go straight or they cross over. Now, so for every stage, there are these 4 delay parameters. The length of these electrical paths are exactly the same, made by very, very careful circuit design. However, because of process variations, the delay values, any electrical signal on transmission takes certain delays. Just like any network, any packet transfer takes certain delays. Part of it is routing delay, part of it is your network stack delay from the starting end. Okay, majorly is routing delay, but there is also an electrical conduction delay. The signals, when they go over the electrical paths or radio waves or whatever, wireless links, there is some delay incurred. These are electromagnetic signals, so very fast, but still it is not like an infinite speed. This is less at the speed of less than the speed of light, of course, because that is the upper limit. So every path have variations in these delays, and these variations, as the signals proceed from the leftmost stage till the rightmost stage, these variations accumulate over the stages, and these variations keep on adding. Finally, it reaches a D flip-flop as an arbiter, which is called an arbiter. An arbiter is a circuit which determines which of two incoming signals have won a race. This D flip-flop has its D input connected to the top and its clock input connected to the bottom. Suppose the signal that comes out of the final output on the top has won the race. So this D becomes 1, and then the clock signal becomes 1. In that case, the clock signal peacefully samples the logic 1 value at the D input, and the output becomes 1. So initially the output is reset to, response is reset to 0, then it becomes 1. On the other hand, if the clock signal wins the race, then this positive edge samples logic 0, because this upper signal has still not reached the D. In that case, the response remains 0. So for a particular combination of ones and zeros that you apply at the string of zeros and ones that you apply as the challenge, you get one bit of output bit 0 or 1 as the response. In this way, again, after noting down the response for a given input, you reset the flip-flop. Again, you give a this step input at the leftmost input. If there is an n-bit challenge, you will get 2n possible paths and you will fill up a 2 to the power n size truth table. Okay, because a unique path is selected by a challenge in every case. Okay, so this advantage is quite simple structure by modern digital design standards. Every stage is only 2 into 1, 2:1 flip-flop multiplexers. Everybody knows them, and 1 D flip-flop at the end. That is also very common. So it's a simple structure, low hardware overhead thing. But the disadvantage is that it is susceptible to modeling attacks, as we will see in the second half of the lecture. The second PAF example basically compares the delay values of or the oscillation values of certain oscillator type circuits. So you apply the same n-bit challenge into two very large multiplexers, 2 to the power n input multiplexers. With the same challenge, they select from a collection of these ring oscillators, which are oscillator type circuits which keep on generating clock-like waveforms with slightly differing frequencies to each other because of process variation. They select one at the top marks and one at the bottom marks. They in turn drive two counters. Because the clocks are with slightly different frequencies, the counters are count forward at slightly different rates. And if you stop the counting after a certain point of time with control signals, the count values will be slightly different in these two counters. You can compare the count values to find by these are binary counters. So you can compare the count values to figure out which one is larger and which one is smaller. And that decision of whether the top counter is 1 or the bottom counter is 1 can be encoded into 1 bit. So in this case, it is gives a 1-bit response for again an n-bit challenge. So this is slightly difficult to model also, although there are certain techniques which can model this. I'll not go into them. But the problem with this is they require exponential number of ring oscillators. For n-bit challenge, they require 2 power n ring oscillators. And they also consume a lot of power. Okay. So n equal to 64 or n equal to 128 is impossible to design for these circuits. Maximum you can go is n equal to 10 maybe. Okay, which is not very useful. Whereas for the arbiter puffs, you can easily go up to n equal to 128. Regularly, that can be done. So I will stop here now. Primarily, we will be concentrating on the arbiter puff because it is simple to design and it has given rise to many combinations which are more difficult to model. First, Pranesh will describe the way to model an arbiter puff, and then he will describe ways to model variations of the arbiter puff circuit which are more resistant to modeling attack, but finally they have also been attacked in some of the work that he has done during his PhD till now using deep learning. Okay, so we are kind of one of the pioneering research groups in the world to apply deep learning for puff modeling. Other groups have earlier applied more traditional techniques, classical techniques like artificial neural network with only one hidden layer, then maybe logistic regression, subboard vector machines, etc. Pranesh will present results with deep learning and then advanced deep learning of how to reduce the computational cost of the learning exercise. Okay, so I will now stop here and Pranesh will take over. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be presenting the topic recent advances in machine learning based modeling attacks on puffs in continuation with what Rajat sir has been described. So my the topic outline is as follows. So I'll introduce what do we actually mean by model building attacks, and as Rajat sir mentioned it, so we mainly concentrate on arbiter puff model, and I will briefly explain how do we attack arbiter puff model, and also there has been upgradation on the puff side, so which uses arbiter puff as a constituent puffs, and so we can discuss more about the composite puffs and the more modeling attacks on that. So the kind of modeling attacks that we cover in this session includes logistic regression and R work, which uses deep feedforward neural networks, and further going into the more advanced level, where we proposed a dedicated ML model to attack it, which uses tensor concepts. So which we call it as a ECP TRN. In that, that will be kind of exciting session where we introduce introduction to tensors and decomposition of tensors, tensor regression, and finally how do we build this model. Okay, so as Rajat sir explained, so puffs are primarily hardware security primitives, which generates unique signature for each device instances, right? So although the puffs means physically unclonable functions, but theoretically it means like that, but we have seen that there is a gap between the theory and practical implementation, because of which there have been a lot of attacks has been possible on the puffs. So currently known attacks includes direct physical cloning, laser based fault attacks, and machine learning based modeling attacks. So modeling attacks are considered to be greatest threat. The reason is because the direct cloning or laser-based fault attacks needs a physical presence. You need to be, the attacker has to be has a proximal access to this puffs. Whereas modeling attacks, you don't need the knowledge of any circuit. Like you don't need the knowledge of the, you don't really have to access the circuit. What you need is just the CRPs. So I think it is quite clear from the previous session of Rajat sir that puff is, if you consider it as a black box model, we supply the inputs as a challenges and we get the responses. So in the modeling attacks, we use this small fraction of CRPs. What do we mean by CRPs here is the challenge response pair, that is the input and the output. The challenge response pair we collect it, and the small fraction of such CRPs is used for modeling the puff instances. So these are so this is the main classification of modeling attacks on puff. So there are three mainly categories. The first one is only CRP based, which uses only challenge responses, and second one is hybrid features, and third one is which uses theoretical ML work. So we can see that the only CRP based uses some evolutionary algorithms to attack, as well as the ML and DL algorithms. So what do we mean by hybrid features is, along with the CRPs, it uses some additional features, so which can be categorized into side channel and fault injection. Like in the side channel, we use the noise based features, and the attack has been proposed using CMAES, that is covariance matrix adaptation evolutionary algorithm. And the another kind of side channel features that we use is power and timing based, which uses logistic regression, which we will cover in the next slides. And other kinds of hybrid feature based modeling attack is which we can use is fault injection method, where the noise is used as a extra feature along with the CRPs. And in the third category, where the theoretical ML framework, so we mainly use the pack learning to estimate, okay, how much to answer the questions like how many CRPs are required to attack particular puff, right? So I think Rajat sir has described this arbiter puff. So basically, I'll just summarize it. So it uses two port networks where there are two inputs and two outputs which are cascaded, and at the end we have an arbiter puff. So based on the challenges, we will have a unique responses. So the response can be represented using 1 or 0 based on with the convenience of which one is faster and slower. So the same work, the MIT work actually proposed Arbeiterpuff, and in the same work, they have also proposed the mathematical model of this Arbeiterpuff, where we can see that this the delay difference between these two lines, right? It can be formulated as dot product of uh, W into phi. So what is W? What is phi is? W is a weight vector which is of n plus 1 dimensional vector, and phi is a parity vector where phi can be derived using the using this formula, right? So where which mainly uses challenges. So what do we mean by here like this is, so if we know the challenges, we can get to know the parity vectors, which is phi. And now if I know the responses, that is the delta c, so I know that in the I can derive the parity vector from the challenges. And if I know the responses, then if in some way if I'm able to learn the W, which is a weight vector, then I should be able to successfully model the Arbeiterpuff. So this is where the application of machine learning becomes very clear here. So so let's see what is this in terms of geometrical interpretation. So we saw that the delay difference between uh, the delay difference between the two lines is given by dot product, right? So here what exactly it means that is, so we can classify the responses using then hyperplane, which means that they are linearly separable. So let me explain with an example classification of a 4-bit APUF. This should make things very clear on how do we attack simple APUF, right? So I'll explain it probably step by step. So let in the step one, let's consider that. So here I consider the 4-bit APUF where the challenges are C1, C2, C3, C4, and responses is the binary values. So for the attacking of this one, so these are the values I got from the particular MATLAB simulation. So now for the attacking, the next step is I have to transform these challenges into parity vectors using the above transformation. So if I transform it, so note that we had a 4-bit APUF, means 4 challenge bits. Now those are converted into 5-bit parity vectors. So this is and we and I also included the R values also, like replacing the 0 values with -1. So now this becomes a like data set for the puff modeling. So now if I apply the SVM model, so I get this weight vectors which are described here, and then based on that we can derive the equation of an hyperplane. So for especially for this talk, I have made these codes accessible in the GitHub, so that everyone can try this basic things and get to know more about the how to attack the basic puffs. So for we saw that Arbeiterpuff is quite easily can be modeled using the SVM and LR. So because of the nature is it's a linearly separable. So to improve this puffs, there has been more complicated puffs, and to attack that also logistic regression has been used. So let us quickly know about logistic regression so that we can study the more robust paths. So logistic regression is a well-known machine learning algorithm that finds the relationship between the features and probability of particular outcome. So in a simple words, we can say that logistic regression is uses similar equations of linear regression but puts the outcomes in terms of logic. So on deriving the equations, we get the sigma as a uh, sigmoid function. So to increase the robustness of Arbeiterpuff, uh, one idea that has been followed is called XOR Arbeiterpuff, where uh, let's say X APUFs are used and their output of APUFs is has been XORed to produce a single bit responses. So if we have this puff, so this can be mathematically expressed as using this formula, where we saw that the sign of uh, weight vector into phi represents each arbiter puff. But now if I have, let's say, X X such arbiter puff, and output of each arbiter puff I have XORed it. So I can represent it in terms of product if I encode it in terms of +1 -1. Hence, this equation justifies the XOR A puff. So this is the XOR. We use the XOR as a main combination function because we know that XOR is quite nonlinear from the earlier times of perceptron. Uh, so we know that this is highly nonlinear and it becomes quite difficult to model from the machine learning angle. So what we saw in the attacks also, the increasing the value of X. Let's say I have 2 XOR, which means that I have employed 2 arbiter puff is less robust than the 3 XOR. So increasing the value of X results in the exponential increase in training data and training time requirement. So this is a quite improvement considering the robustness of the puff. And the state of the art values, attack values for the XOR arbiter puff includes like it requires 1 TB of main memory and around like 350 million CRPs required to attack just a 9 XOR A puff using logistic regression. So this is quite clear that XOR is quite difficult to attack, but there has been additional problem which caused by XOR arbiter puff is reliability. So what do we mean by reliability of a puff is the puff responses will vary if there is any change in the temperature or so, which makes it use those as a features to attack it, which is like we saw it in the hybrid features based modeling attack. So if the temperature is varying, then the responses of the puffs also vary. This characteristic can be used to effectively model XOR arbiter puff. So we saw that there are two main problems. One thing is for XOR puff, it is still can be attackable, but it is comparatively better with respect to arbiter puff. And second thing is it has introduced a much more bigger problem, which is reliability. So in the next two puffs, which I'm going to describe, each is designed to solve one of these problems. So the next puff that I'm going to describe is lightweight secure puff. So lightweight secure puff was designed to provide enhancement over XOR A puff. So where if you can see in this diagram, so the instead of directly applying the challenges, here there is a separate input network which transforms the challenges into something else, and those transformed challenges will be applied to the each of the arbiter puff. So this was the idea behind the lightweight secure puff, and still we saw that each of the output bit still suffers from the reliability issues because the LSPuff was mainly designed to increase the robustness. So the reliability based attacks which were possible in the XOR puffs are still possible with LSPuff. And another problem that additionally another characteristics of LSPuff can be used to attack them is cryptanalysis based machine learning attacks. So where this input network can be used to launch the cryptanalytic attacks. And the next puff that we going to cover is multiplexer puff, where we saw that the XOR puff has two problems. The first thing is it is susceptible to modeling attacks, and the another thing is it has reliability issues. So in this multiplexer puff, it has been designed to achieve the good reliability, mainly from the point of reliability. It was designed where, as you can see in this diagram, it uses a multiplexer, and the input values are arbiter puffs here, and the selection values also the arbiter puff, and the output is decided based on that. And nkm puff here employs 2 raised to k 2 raised to k inputs, the 2 raised to k arbiter puffs, and one output, and the k selector lines are again arbiter puffs here. So along with the multiplexer puff, they also propose two variants of it, mainly from the angle of again robustness, robustness against modeling based attacks and robustness against cryptanalysis. So one variant is this is RMPUF, which is robust against reliability based modeling attacks, and this one is CMPUF, where robust against cryptanalysis attack. Here I'll just quickly describe. So in what is the difference between the MPUF and RMPUF is, so here each of the multiplexer uses separate arbiter puff as a selection line. So as you can see, each of the multiplexer uses different one, and in the CM puff, uh, CMPUF we don't use like instead of giving two separate arbiter puff as the inputs, we use inverter. We use single A puff and we use inverter as a input to these multiplexers. So we saw that from the XOR APUF and LS puff has been susceptible to logistic regression based attacks, but this multiplexer puff and interpose puff was like there was no attacks till now. So interpose puff was a very well known puff recently published in the teachers. The idea is where, so I take a XX or A puff, and the so for a particular challenges, the response of an XX or A puff is interposed with the challenges of the YX or A puff. So and the response has been the responses will be collected. So this collectively we call it as a XY puff. So where the from the experimental values, we saw that when the middle bit is used as an interposed position, so we achieve the greater robustness against the machine learning attacks. And the authors also proved that in the paper, 3.3 IPUF is sufficiently resistant to all known attacks. So this was quite recent work. So in this one, so we will describe our work where we saw that the MPUF and IPUF were not covered as a part of an attack, but we describe it in using the deep feedforward neural networks. So in our work, so we cover XOR based puffs, which includes XOR APUF, LS puff, IPUF, and the multiplexer based MPUF, CMPUF, and RMPUF. So to collect the arbiter puff data sets, as sir explained, we mainly collected from the MATLAB simulation models. The reason is it is quite difficult to implement on FPGA. The major problem that we encounter is poor uniqueness. And in our experiments, we performed for 64-bit and 128-bit puffs, and we generated the random challenges for 64-bit and 128-bit, and the responses were collected. And to calculate the reliability of the each puff, we characterized each the simulated APUF instance 11 times, and the responses values are obtained after majority voting. And to calculate the uniqueness and uniformity, response sets for each puff variants was considered for the same challenge sets. So most of you probably already know what do you mean by deep neural networks. So neural networks that represents an attempt to mimic the biological nervous system, and it consists of simple processing elements that are interconnected via weights. So we saw that there is a huge successful deep neural networks are quite successful in image classification and natural language processing. And we also saw that the neural networks were quite there before, let's say around 20 years before also, but we saw that there has been quite progress with increasing of the neural network layers. This the reason is that it has been proven that with if we increase the number of layers, we can effectively model the uh, we can effectively reduce the number of parameters to train, and also it requires the less number of examples. So this was although it means that although we had it has been proven that using a single hidden layer is sufficient to model any function by neural networks, but using the deeper layers, we can effectively models with less number of parameters. So these are the hyperparameters that we use for our experiments. These are also quite popular one and the state of art. So this is the architecture diagram. So where we feed the parity vectors as an input, and our output is so responses, and we do the supervised learning. Please note that although we have XOR A puff, multiplexer puff, interpose puff, so what we use is common architecture. That means that although we try to extract the dependencies between the parity vectors and output responses, although it is not clearly visible from the circuit. So these are the results for the XOR arbiter puff. As we have seen that there are two important things to notice here. Like as we increase the number of XORs, the number of the required training CRP count also increases. We can see that uh, with the 2 XOR we need 32K, and with 3 XOR we need 36, and for 6 XOR it goes beyond, like it goes 680K. So it is quite clear that with the increasing XORs, the training CRP counts increases and it gets quite difficult. And we can also see that the 128 bits 128-bit puffs are more robust than the 64-bit. Like so we collected in this experiment 1 million CRPs, and uh, we were not successful in attacking 6 XOR 128-bit 6 XOR. Uh, I think it was not quite sufficient to attack that. But we can see from the table here that so the 5 XOR requires 655K CRPs, and whereas the 5 XOR of 64-bit requires 145 K CRPs. So, and for the LS puff, we saw that the number of CRPs required for the XOR puff, it is greater than that. So LS puff requires more CRPs than the XOR A puffs. So this is also quite clear from the training CRP count. And these are the results of multiplexer puff. Remember that multiplexer puff was mainly designed from the point of reliability. So we were easily able to model this because this was not using any XOR function or so, and it was quite easy. From the training CRP count, you can see that it uses less number of CRPs than the XOR puffs or LS puffs. So this MPUF, attacking MPUF was quite novel from our side, and experiments on IPUF also. So in the paper IPUF, which has been published in the Teachers, so it was proven that initially 3.3 IPUF was resistant of all modeling attacks, is known to be strong enough. But we showed that using the deeper layers of neural networks, we were able to break the 3.3 IPUF with just 240K CRPs, achieving quite good accuracy. And we also further went on to achieve 4.4. Further went on to break the 4.4 IPUF also. And here also we can see that pattern that 128 bits puffs are quite robust than the 64-bit puffs. So in summary, we note that deep learning based models outperforms logistic regressions, and we also attacked using deep learning multiplexer puffs and interpose puffs. And we also saw that uh, LS puff is quite more difficult than the XOR A puffs. And uh, yeah, and in the so we saw that although it was proven that 3.3 IPUF was difficult to break, using the deep feed-forward neural networks, we were able to break the 3.3 IPUF and 4.4 IPUF. So in the next talk, I'll be covering about the tensor based dedicated model to attack XOR puff. So how do we design this, and what are the results of this model? So let me introduce you to tensors. So tensor is mathematical structures for a computer science students. It's easy to visualize them as a multi-dimensional array. We can easily think them as a generalization of scalars, vectors, and matrices. In the image, you can see that uh, the line is a we can say it is a one order tensor, and a scalar is a zero order tensor, and the matrix is two order tensor, and the cube is three order tensors. So I'll come to this tensor rank bit later. So the inner product of tensors, just like the, so we can if we think more of the tensors as a generalized version, it is quite easy for us to relate the operations on tensors also. So the inner product of two same size tensors here is the sum of the product of all its entries. Just like the dot product for the vector, where we multiply the corresponding elements of the same sized vectors and then we sum it up. Here, the inner product is, the notation looks quite complex, but we can imagine that it is just like if there are two tensors of same size, we multiply them and then we sum it all. So this is an important topic, the decomposition of tensors. So tensors are basically quite like it requires a lot of memory to represent them. So the well-known problem that people have been working on this is tensor decomposition, which means that to express the tensor using a low rank tensors. So one of the decomposition type of the tensor is CP decomposition. So there are mainly two kinds of tensor decompositions are available. One is Tucker decomposition, and another one is CP decomposition. So CP decomposition we can understand it is similar like a SVD. People who have understood the SVD decomposition, singular value decomposition for the matrix, it is quite easy. So let me explain this. So you can see in the diagram, so x is a order 3 tensor here, and we can see that we can approximately represent this using the vectors u v w. So we can see in this equation that it it can be ur and vr and wr are the vectors, and using the outer product of all these three, and with some of these three things, so we can approximate a tensor. So we call this r as a rank. So as you can see in this image, the rank of this tensor x is 3, because we use uh, three such outer products, like three summations, like, so we u1 outer product, v1 outer product, w1. So we use three such things, so we can approximate the tensor x with rank 3. So basically, what is tensor regression? So tensor regression is a quite hot topic. People have been working on this in the CV area, mainly because in the if you see the image recognition problems, image classification problems. So mainly we use large networks with convolutions and fully connected layers. So the advantage of using the tensors is actually for the images. Images are multilinear structures, so it is quite, the using tensors is quite appropriate for them. So there has been a lot of progress with tensor regression, and the recent work called tensor regression network, which introduces this differentiable, completely end-to-end differentiable neural network architecture, and which is mainly for the image classification problem. So the main advantage, the main crux of this model is, so it treats the output to be lying in the low rank space and imposes the low tensor rank structures. So and another thing is it uses so I explained that, so there are mainly two types of decomposition. One is Tucker based and the CP decomposition. And in the work that introduces tensor regression network, it mainly uses Tucker based decomposition to solve the image classification problem. So let's see. So how can we apply this tensor regression in our XOR problem? So how does that at all come here? So if we see that in our XOR puff, we saw that the response of an XOR A puff can be represented using this formula, where each of the, let's say we have X XOR A puff, and so each XOR A puff can be represented using sign of dot product of W and parity vector phi. So and we use product notation because we encode them into the +1 -1. So now interestingly, this can also be represented using the tensor form, where um, if W is a tensor, and sorry, WXOR can be represented as a tensor where it is an outer product of WX, and 5XOR can be represented as a outer product, sorry, tensor product. So here what we actually do is we try to solve the problems, we try to apply this tensor based representation and solve this problem using tensor regression network. So the general computational problem that's solved by TRN is, we can imagine like just like the how the linear regression is there, where which can be represented as f of x is equal to w into x, where the w and x are vectors. So here for the tensor regression network, we can consider them as a w and x as a tensors, and we take the dot product of them and sum them with bias. So this is the main problem that we are going to solve. So here, if we see this, uh, the main problem with this formula is, so w and x will be quite huge. So let's say that if I use 3 XOR, which means that essentially, so here I will have x is 3, and the size of the each phi value will be, yeah, 65. We saw that for the 4-bit APUF, our challenge bit, our parity vector size will be 5. So let's say that for a 64-bit APUF, for a 64-bit XOR puff, 3 XOR puff, so the x value will be 3, and the parity vector size will be 65. So this will be of size 65 into 65 into 65. So it becomes, which is quite huge, and so this will be the major problem. Like from the 2 points, first thing is the computation will be quite problematic, and the second thing is it is difficult to store such a huge big tensors. So what we do is that, so we apply the CP decomposition based tensor regression. So we notice that two important points. First thing is in this formula, so we can express this W um, as a we can represent it as a approximation. We can decompose it using the CP decomposition, and another important thing is here, X is inherently rank 1 tensor, so because of which we can simplify it quite better. So which we call it as a efficient CP decomposition based tensor regression network, which is ECPTRN. So how do we do this simplification is, so let me explain this. So let's say that we consider tensor A, where which is represented, which can be approximated using CP decomposition with the vectors ER1, ER2, and ERN. So let's say that this is my one tensor and this is another tensor. So if I have to do the dot product, so the major problem that here we encounter is, if I have to do dot product, I have to multiply each corresponding element and sum it up, right? So here, this, if I represent instead using the CP decomposition, the problem becomes quite simple. Like, so here the tensor is, A tensor is represented using the uh, CP decomposition form, and B is represented using CP decomposition form. So A and B are, all these are vectors here. So this can be, now I can derive the inner product of these two tensors just by taking a dot product of those vectors. So as you can see, this is quite big because we will save, first thing is computations and second thing is memory. So let's apply this formula. So we applied this formula simplification in and derive the ML model to attack the XOR APUF. So let me explain with now from the coming back to the point of XOR APUF. So let's say that if I represent x XOR a puffs here, which can be represented using let's say n plus 1 into x times, like, and the weight tensor also the dimension of x order tensor. So here x is a x order tensor and w is a x order tensor. Now now let's say that now I will represent w as a CP decomposition formula and consider the output as lying in the low rank space. So now using these two things and considering that the x is already inherently rank 1 tensor, I derive this formula where uh, we can apply the simplification, and then since the w is now represented as represented in CP decomposed form, so we can, instead of uh, having huge inner product multiplications, we can arrive at the simplified form. So this is the equation 14 represents the final model, which is computationally quite simple and uses tensor based regression, which is an again end-to-end differentiable network. So this is the diagrammatical representation of ECPTRN for 3 XOR APUF. So I have here in the 3 XOR, and here I have the W tensor. This is the X tensor and W tensor. So the W tensor can be approximated using rank R, and I made the output to be lie in the low rank space. And I take this using these two. I take the inner product using this formula and applying the sigmoid at the end to classify the responses. So this achieves the lot of computational efficiency. So how much is that is? So we can see that initially if we just do the inner product of two tensors, it is the computations will scale up to n plus 1 raised to x. But now using this simplified approach, it will be just x into n into r. So the important thing to notice here that so r is a new hyperparameter that gets added into our model. So these are the main hyperparameter values that we used. So we saw that the batch size was quite sensitive in our modeling, and the learning rate also. So varying these two, we had quite changes in the accuracy, right? So so these are the hyperparameter values that we used for uh, attacking the XOR, and we applied till the 8 XOR for the 64-bit and till 7 XOR for 128-bit. So these are the results that we achieved using this ECPTRN. Uh, there are a couple of things to notice here. First thing is that we see that so mainly we see that in the training CRP count. So let's say that for 8 XOR or 7 XOR 64-bit 7 XOR APUF, ECPTRN uses 800K CRPs, whereas the one which uses the logistic regression, it uses mainly 20,000K CRPs. So which is, and the accuracy achieved is quite same. So this was a drastic reduction in the CRPs, and we also saw that like for the 6x or 128-bit puff, the logistic regression based network uses 15,000 k CRPs, whereas the ECPTRN uses 1200 CRPs. And although actually logistic regression based attack employs a quite sophisticated uh, cluster machines to perform an attack, whereas our attack is performed on a single desktop simple workstation machine in our lab. So this is how the CRPs vary. Like as we increase the XORs, uh, it tries to improve exponentially, but there is a drastic reduction in our in our case using the ECPTRN model. So this is the summary of the tutorial. So where sir has covered the basic concept of PUF, properties of PUF, and metrics to evaluate PUF. And I had covered mainly on the machine learning part, which includes the deep feed forward neural networks, and also on the our new dedicated model using tensors. Okay, thank you.